So I remember as a child, I was watching Harry Potter in Hindi uh, on my cable TV or something. And that time, translation used to be very literal. Like they used to just do word to word translation. So I still remember this because it was so funny back then. But like they say "holy shit" a lot
Yeah.
in like throughout the series. So the Hindi translation became like Pavitra Tatti, which for people who don't know Hindi actually means like uh, pious poop or something.
Yeah.
So, oh God, I found that so funny. I think only recently Netflix subtitles especially do this cultural appropriation, which is pretty like cool to see also. But yeah, like we've come quite far, especially in text, in terms of doing this cultural appropriation. Yeah.
All right. So, hello and welcome everyone to whoever is tuning into this particular podcast. Today, I have with me Simran Khanuja. Simran is a PhD candidate at Carnegie Mellon University. Her research focuses on making AI systems more useful for people across different languages and cultures, with an emphasis on multilingual and multimodal foundation models. Prior to CMU, Simran spent around 2 years as a pre-doctoral researcher at Google Research and contributing to multilingual language technologies. And also, she did some interesting research back in Microsoft when she was in India. Her recent work includes the Pangea multilingual multimodal foundation model, image transcreation for cultural localization, and new approaches to evaluating culturally relevant AI systems. Welcome to the show, Simran. Nice to have you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thanks so much for the invite. Happy to be here.
Nice. To kick off the podcast today, can you tell us a bit about your background and entry point in AI, and how did you end up working at the intersection of various languages and cultural nuances in AI?
Yeah, so I started working in a AI ML in 2017. It was the third year of my undergrad. And I was actually very fascinated at the time by Google Magenta. That's when they had, I think, formed. And I was really into music, so I wanted to do AI and music at the time. Like I found their demos really cool. Um, but then, like after my third year, I started searching for, sorry, opportunities to like get some internship experience or some research experience because I didn't have much in my undergrad. And obviously, like there wasn't a lot available for AI and music. And I was kind of confused between, okay, NLP and CV, but NLP, like language and music, is kind of processed using the same architecture because we have like discrete tokens. They can be broken down into long sequences. And that's kind of what made me gravitate towards NLP initially, hoping that I'll come back to music at some point, which I haven't yet, but hopefully I'll do it at some point. Um, so yeah, then I was searching for internships. I interned at Triple IT Hyderabad in India. There they were working on code mixed languages, and their like code mixing is a very common phenomenon in sort of multilingual communities because people speak three or four languages, so they end up like mixing them in a way that sounds very natural. But there aren't really formal rules that dictate how code mixing is done. So obviously, it's very hard for models to learn that because there isn't a pattern to uncover for at least some languages, some language pairs, but some others have rules. But yeah. But anyway, so that was code mixing. And then after my fourth year, I so we had this option in my undergrad of either doing this research thesis or doing like an industry internship. And I chose to do a research thesis. Very fortunate to get an opportunity at the Microsoft Research India Lab, where I was for a year. And even there, like they used to, like one of the main projects focused on code mix languages, very prevalent in like India labs back then. So I built a benchmark for code mixing. Then I slowly moved towards, this was 2019. So this was when like Bird came out in 2018, Multilingual Bird came out in 2019. So I started working on those models. So yeah, that's how I think after that I also went to Google Research in India. And in industry, like the focus was mainly how to make these models work better for Indian languages. So I did some work at Google Research where I built a model for Indian languages. It was called Mural. We open sourced it. Um, and then I also did some work trying to sort of integrate that into Google Assistant. So, yeah, I think given the location where I started my research, I naturally ended up doing a lot of multilingual, multicultural work. And yeah, like that's how I kind of started everything.
Nice. I have like so many follow-ups, like, but I'll try to
Okay.
at least gravitate towards like towards the middle part of our conversation of like what different challenges you saw while you were working on these projects. But um, since you have like some industry experience,
Mhm.
even before you started your PhD when you moved to States,
Yeah.
what was your rationale? Because I think like when I started my PhD, I didn't have much of industry experience, but like given what I
Mm.
have now seen in the industry and how different people approach different problems, I would have a different perspective choosing to do a PhD or not. So, what how would you say your industry experience influenced your decision to do a PhD, and then itself within a PhD selecting which topic you want to do your research on?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I think like I'll break it down into two parts. I think the first part is like what motivated me to spend some time in industry. So the answer is like it's partly logistical and partly like my own choice. So I think this was 2020. So the Microsoft research internship was actually a part of my thesis and my entire undergraduate program. Um, I may have applied for a PhD like after my Microsoft research experience, but it was COVID. And I was supposed to go to another research lab in Singapore to do like an RA ship. But then all of that got canceled because of COVID. And I was very fortunate again that the Google Research India lab, it started in 2019 or 2018. It was just 1 or 2 years. And I was also very excited to sort of hear that, like, my manager at the time was Partha. Like, he was a prof at IISc. I knew a lot about him, and I was very excited that I might get an opportunity to work with him. Um, so, yeah, mostly because of these reasons, I decided to do the pre-doctoral, it's called pre-doctoral program at Google Research India. And I think looking back, I know COVID was a very, very hard time for a lot of people, like for all of us, I would say. But like, um, I like look at that opportunity as a blessing in disguise for me, because uh, a lot of, I think the ways in which I do research today or approach problems has been influenced by my time at Google, and also at Microsoft, and also just the way my managers used to think. So, at least at Google, since I did some product work as well, a lot of the research that I did was motivated by the product need. Um, so, the first project I did was building that multimodal Indian language model Mural, which was meant to be open source. It wasn't like very related to a product, but after that, we were trying to see if we can sort of bring it in into the product stack. So for that, um, like after we built the model, it was a product need that we want to bring these model capabilities into this product. So now how do we do it? So first we did like a research prototype for 6 months, and then I spent like almost a year maybe just trying to bring that into product or whatever. So like that really exposed me to the challenges of bringing a research project into a product, because dealing with user data is very, very messy, and dealing with your toy data set is very simple. Um, but I didn't realize the impact of this at the time. Um, but I really valued the fact that we could bring it into product and close this sort of uh, problem originating from real world use, then doing some research, then trying to bring it back into a product and improving it to solve or like to cater to that real world need, right? So, like looking back, I think that made me feel very good. Like being able to actually see this loop close. And I think even during my PhD, then I ended up, this was also informed by my current advisor at CMU. Like when I was initially searching for like, okay, what should I do in my PhD? I really wanted to work on a problem that's like, maybe because I had that Google experience, I wanted to work on something which can be used in the real world or is informed by something that people need. And that's how I started working on like, maybe we can talk about it later, like all the image transcreation work was mostly motivated by what um, people actually need for like ads, education, movies, and lots of other things. So I think that's how I was influenced by my industry experience. And I think even today, like at least the way I ask research questions is like, would how would this be useful? And how can we actually do something in a way that it will translate to real world use? So I really like that aspect of research. Like, yeah.
Okay. And was doing a PhD always in your career plan, or was it the problem that you really liked and you wanted to do a deep dive, make a
Yeah.
mature contribution, and that's what motivated you towards doing a PhD?
So since the third year of my undergrad, like I wanted to do a PhD, like, and the feeling just grew stronger through the different experiences I had for the next 3, 4 years. Um, I've tried to answer this question a lot. People used to ask me, like, why do you want to do a PhD? I did not have a very concrete answer back then. I had a very sort of romanticized, like, notion of a PhD in my head. Um, I really wanted to spend, like, some time. I'm not saying like the romanticized notion was not manifested, like, a lot of it was. But yeah, I was really excited to just spend some time um, exploring a few things in depth. So even I think like as far as I've seen how people approach a PhD, like some people either do this sort of breadth focused thing where they explore a bunch of things for the first 2, 3 years, like, or maybe throughout their PhD, and then their thesis would take some of the works together. Um, I don't know why I really had this like wish to explore something in a lot of depth. Like I really valued depth because I used to not care so much about the like exact problem I'm working on. Um, I mean, obviously, I had a few constraints like the real world applicability that I spoke about, but even within that domain, there are many, many problems that you can work on, right? So I used to just think that the deeper I go into a problem, um, it becomes more interesting for me because it's like, if you've ever seen that graph of like, I don't know, like innovation, and then you make that small bump at the outermost circle. Um, so I used to always feel that the more depth I have, the more I'll be able to sort of make that bump and innovate and think of very like novel, interesting ideas and like uh those are the kind of things I used to think. And I also just wanted like to experience how um I might what I'll do with like the freedom of choosing my own problems and time, like sort of just exploring my own like research itch in a sense, because like you have constraints, but like very very few constraints while doing a PhD compared to if you're doing research in industry. So I really wanted to experience that. I also thought it would be a very unique one-time experience in my life. I also viewed it as a challenge. Like I used to think that I'll I used to think of meta. I even do that now. Like I used to think of meta level skills a lot. Like it would teach me how to be self-disciplined, how to be very resourceful, how to be independent in my own thinking and stuff like that. So a lot of these things motivated me to do a PhD. But yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. I completely agree. One thing that I've learned, at least when before I joined my PhD and after I completed my PhD, one thing I've learned is it helps you be a better person in terms of ideating different problems. Like before I joined my PhD, I had like so many ideas that I thought if I had the chance, I would be able to do X number of
yeah.
contributions or like X percentage. Versus it becomes much more grounded. Like throughout the years of PhD, is yes, definitely taking ideas to an actual realizable scale is one thing that I've, at least most of the people who do the PhDs at least learn. And even if not through PhDs as well, like different industry experiences can also help you do that, but it's
Yeah.
very selective.
Yeah, for sure. I think like I was again like I keep saying this, but even my time in industry, I was really lucky because I had a lot of freedom even back then. This was all pre-ChatGPT era. It was so much fun for me, especially like it was COVID. Everything was online, everyone was online, because of which I could collaborate. Like location was not an issue anymore. Like I could collaborate with people in the US, in Germany, in Japan. Like we had all these cross uh, geography collaborations. So yeah, like very unique experience. But now I think things have changed, obviously. Like it's probably happening. I don't know much, but maybe in fewer pockets.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Nice. And so if I were to draw a trajectory curve, like you said, you were always interested in building systems or tools that have a real world utility. Then you had the chance to work on multi-language and multilingual problems. And
Yeah.
in your, you have always mentioned that you wanted to make tools that has real world utility with aligning to different cultures, different languages, different backgrounds. So how did that evolution happen? Like how did you transition from working on multilingual problem to multicultural nuances within AI? And like how has PhD or your recent projects been focused along those lines?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think like uh I I didn't really make a conscious choice to work on like multicultural, but when I was like um doing research before in industry, like this was more from a just a very research perspective, and like I used to feel intuitively that we need to build multimodal technologies, because like the same argument that a lot of people use, it's like humans have five senses, and like we interact like visually, through text, speech, and so many other modalities. So this was also influenced by, so the first research project I had done, like I had done it in my fourth year of undergrad, it was on multimodal emotion recognition. And I still remember like since I was very new to research, I used to get very excited when I used to read papers. So there was this one paper which just simply talked about, it was trying to do like emotion recognition in a video. And they simply said that, okay, if someone smiles at t seconds and someone says something positive at t plus 4 seconds, then those two things will like reinforce each other to give a higher confidence on like a positive sentiment or something. And then it's me like, oh, that's so cool. Like, how would you do this sort? How would you encode this sort of temporal dependency between two different modalities and stuff like that? But the explanations in the multimodal papers used to feel very intuitive because that's how like we interact with the world and that's how we think. And like even when you think about like us, I really wanted to work on like vision and text because like say for example when we watch a video, we can consume information way faster than, at least for me, than reading text. Like some people who are avid readers like actually just love to read and that's how they can process information faster than a visual medium. But for me, like an image or like a video of when I'm trying to learn something was much better. So I used to always think that I really want to learn how to build multimodal models. How can we sort of um, learn this intermodal and intramodal like dependencies and stuff like that. So yeah, that was actually my main motivation. And given my background in multilingual, when I was um, searching for problems, um, I came across this problem of um, like I wanted to extend machine translation to the visual medium. And in the visual medium, like languages don't really exist. So it's about cultures, and that's how it became like multicultural. So I think, yeah, these were like just framings and words changing across different modalities. But like the way I got into all of this was I really wanted to work with multimodal data and multimodal technologies. So yeah, yeah,
That's very nice. I mean, the one thing that I really liked about you coming up with this idea is the way how you connected the idea of using multimodal, but with the aspect of improving cultural alignment between different backgrounds. Because
yeah,
even so, when I was going through your papers and like a bunch of motivations to understand like how did you end up coming up with this topic, um, even I had some background working with multimodal data when I did my internship at Dolby, and they wanted to see if we can understand human context using different modalities. And that's when, similar to what you explained, when we look at a content or piece of content, it has like so many different modalities, not just text. The way humans express sarcasm, emotion, everything else that cannot be captured with just one modality. And then it becomes a game of understanding how do you model the intricacies between these modalities, like what
yeah,
happens, like you said, emotion at time second t does not really mean, it can mean n different things if it has like different temporal dependencies like t minus 1, t plus 1, and all those kind of stuff. So
yeah,
one thing that I really liked is like how you got motivated by a technical problem that has been well researched, but then you tied it to your background with language and working with different languages, and say if I can apply this technology, it can at least solve this one problem, that is the cultural non-alignment that was existing in models before. And that brings me down to the question of, if we were to start from the very top of the problem, um, when we hear all these models that are like general purpose models or foundation models, how much do you think these models are really general purpose? Because whenever we hear, if, as layman, if I were to understand any big company models that are coming out nowadays, they have models in different languages, they do support different languages. How much general purpose would you say these models in general are?
yeah. That's a great question. I think even when I was in industry, this was like an open research question. Like, do we have this one big multilingual model that serves all our users, or do we have like these maybe smaller specialized models or something like that, or something in between where we have one model for, uh, like, say, a certain group of languages and cultures and another model for. So, to answer your question, how general purpose do I think these models are? Um, I would say maybe when we started building out these models in like 2020, 2023 was when all the 2022 was November 2022 was when ChatGPT came out, and then I think after that we had a exponential rise in like the scale and the goodness of these models. I think initially there were problems because they were smaller models. They had been trained on a lot of internet data, and that time the training regime was like pre-training and then fine-tuning for a particular task. But in today's training stack, we have like pre-training, mid-training, post-training has SFT and like RL, and like people also are trying to align the model for different use cases. I think just yesterday there was Thinking Machines Inkling model which came out, and I think the way they were trying to pitch it as it's open source, it's multimodal, and I think the main selling point was it's customizable. Like they want to support the infra to for users to be able to sort of customize that model for their use case. And I've seen this trend generally growing because initially I think when the models came out, people quickly realized that they are not general purpose if they are just trained on static internet data and don't take any feedback from humans during interactions and change how they behave. Um, so I definitely think that uh, they are not general purpose completely today because even now, if you would like at the core of it, they're all trained with like the maximum likelihood estimation objective. So they want to produce responses that increase the probability of observing a particular output in their training data. And for that, if you have an input, say like write me a recipe for a dish or something, they will most likely surface very popular dishes on the internet, which may not be equally sampled from all the dishes of the world, which it should probably do. Um, so, like, I don't think this problem of them being maybe biased towards certain people, tasks, languages, etc., would completely go away just because of how they are trained. But I'm seeing this increasing positive trend of moving towards customizable models, adaptable models. There is a lot of research being done on efficiency too. So I do find some promise in the idea of maybe having very highly capable, very big models. And if distillation research goes really far, maybe we can have much smaller, efficient models that might be more specialized, um, that such that they can. This would also increase their reach. Like if you have smaller models which work faster, people can use it without spending a lot of cost on compute. That would, I think, be a nice future to look forward to. But I'm not. These are just some hypotheses that I have. Um, So yeah, I think we're moving towards like a model framework that could potentially become general purpose. I don't think one model can be general purpose, even if we try to keep aligning it to different values, because that alignment has to account for the person who's interacting with it. So unless we nail down like personalization, which is also a hard problem. But like learning at test time from the user conversations in a way that is like optimal. Like that's also another question, like what is optimal in personalization? Because you don't want to echo what the person thinks all the time. So it's like, yeah, very complicated stuff. Um, but yeah, I do think we can move towards a system of general purpose, or at least more and more inclusive of different people, the kind of tasks they want to use it for, etc. Just seeing how things have moved in the past few years.
Right. So, like, yeah, that's what my next question was. Like, do you envision people having different models, like, because for now, if you can see, we have models that are like some model variants that are better at chat versus some model variants
Mhm.
that are better at coding versus
Mhm.
some models that are better at image generation, and they don't really intersect. Like, you can't have one model that is like very accurately being used for the other task. Would you imagine a culturally aligned model that has like some significant value added to it, that would be a standalone model, but not a general purpose that people can just go and like search for random queries? So that would be like, do you envision this as a separate task, and then people develop models on top of it, and this would be like a whole family of culturally aligned models between different backgrounds?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think like at least this is my opinion. Like I think alignment, like say cultural alignment would be a part of it. Maybe task um independent, except for like very objective tasks, like maybe math and coding where you have a very objective answer, like nobody can contest it, nobody can have different. I don't know in math if people have different opinions about different solutions, but like in coding we have tests, and like um if your code passes the test, it's okay. um so I think like um I view those two problems as separate. Alignment is just a way in which the model would interact with you. Um, would it have the kind of, or would it echo the kind of values that you prefer slash you yourself have um, through a number of tasks that you use the model for? Um, so I think the cultural alignment part needs to be baked in into the general purpose models. The degree to which the model leans on this sort of value system slash um like process of how it's learned to align to different users, like the degree to which it leans on that in your interactions may differ across different tasks. So maybe in math and coding you don't really need that as much, but um, for more subjective tasks, you'd heavily lean on that value system. Um, at least that's how I view it. So, yeah, does that make sense? Like,
That makes sense, yeah.
yeah.
and And in general, like, how would you, if you were to evaluate a model, not from like the technical benchmarks or anything, what would you say? Sorry, if I were to rephrase this question, um, what is inherent to these general purpose models that make it not really good at aligning it to different cultures? Is it because they were not trained on the data sets where you would instruction fine tune on top of it, or
Mhm.
is that not the priority of the model, and then they would end up performing bad on general benchmarks? Like, what is the biggest bottleneck to these models not being culturally aligned? Is it the data issue? Is it a training issue? Is it an architecture issue? Why do you see these models failing?
So I think um, data, again, like my opinions, but like data plays a very big role um, in general. Like, for example, if you train a model on Reddit data or some like, yeah, like a small subset of like let's say Reddit, it has more, I guess, unhinged content. Um, and if you interact with that model, it would definitely just imbibe the style of the kind of conversations it's read. Um, so I think like, oh, there was also a very interesting, like a way to sort of verify, I mean, subjectively verify a this hypothesis is I was reading, I think Anthropic had a blog post on how Claude varies across languages or something, like how Claude's values vary across languages. And there they had this, it was interesting, they had this paragraph which spoke about warmth versus rigor, I think. And they saw that maybe in Russian and English, it has heavily leans on the rigor side of things. And in Hindi and there was one more language, Arabic. it leaned towards like heavily leaned towards being warm in its responses. Um, and I think these things are very interesting because it's a reflection of obviously maybe the style of data that is online. I saw someone's retweet and it was about how, like, at least for Hindi, I think a lot of poetry has this sort of like positive slash warm feel to it. And maybe if the model has seen a lot of that data, it reflects. And I think it's also a reflection of the culture, which reflects in how the language is spoken. So, like for me, I have spent a lot of years in India, and I have found like people in India are very like hospitable, like they really like helping each other. And that somehow seeps into the language and the way it's spoken to. And that somehow seeps into like model weights. Um, so I think studying the ways in which the model interacts is also very interesting just from a perspective of learning more about how people who speak the language are, which I find very fascinating. Um, so yeah, I think data is definitely one of the bigger players, in my opinion. And I think the question of alignment may also play a bigger role with languages like English, which are spoken across like many, many countries. So, like, often historically, a language it has been a reflection of the cultures who speak it. Like, there'll be words in a language which might be very specific to say, like, the weather in that particular country, and then you may not have another word for that particular phenomenon in another language. So it's a window to the culture of the people that speak it. But I guess like English is so ubiquitous, spoken by everyone. There's a lot of data online. So it's like, how do you even recognize how to interact with a person, especially if it's in English? That can be a problem. And I think like maybe with very low resource languages, which are spoken by like a very small number of people, again, this is my hypothesis that the alignment part may not even be that big of an issue if you have enough data for that language, of course. And I do think partly the architecture and the way we prompt the models is also to blame because, like I had mentioned, like our training objective is like maximum likelihood. Um, so for a lot of inputs which might be similar, we are surfacing the majority output or averaging across multiple values in some sense, um, which is not something we want to do. We want to be able to learn the distribution and be able to sample from it based on the kind of user you're interacting with. So there is some potential, I think, in even training the models differently, designing the loss function differently so that we don't average out across multiple values, if that makes sense. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I think about.
Yes. Yeah, the more the initially when I was reading very early work where people were finding that prompting the model very differently has different outcomes, and that could be like one of the ways to solving alignment issues. And I used to be like always wary of that real approach. Like, does that really have any concrete merit in terms of making proofs, or like at least making claims that yes, the model is aligned or not? But the more I have been reading, I have seen there are sophisticated ways to make sure prompting can be really improved, and there is some potential. But I wanted to hear your thoughts. Like, how much does making sure prompting is correct has
Mhm.
a role on alignment? If even if I were to tweak these models and make sure the prompt is super accurate, because yes, I can set a system prompt, right? Like that can be a default whenever I'm interacting with these models. Would that be able to solve the alignment issue to an extent, in at least some tasks?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think prompting can get you to a decently large extent, can get you maybe if I spitball some random number like 60 to 70% there. The issues that I think of are mm, it may require a very large number of turns and interactions to actually get to what you want. Um, because what's happening, I think, internally also is that models' instruction following capabilities are improving a lot. So maybe you'll probably get to what you want in a fewer number of turns or like fewer number of prompts, but there's still that overhead of like interacting with the model in that way, which actually we do. Like I think I, at least when I'm interacting with these LLMs, I keep asking follow-up questions. It's not that hard. Now you just can say, oh no, I meant this. You don't even need to write the entire thing together. And unfortunately, we don't have a benchmark that evaluates models in that kind of. Actually, I think I had seen one recently, but I don't think it's like a very standard way of measuring how well these LLMs perform. So I don't think we have an objective way to measure it yet. Um, but I also think, okay, so this is like I'm doing this project on trying to improve like diversity in image generation. Like I think um T2I models tend to have this mode collapse issue where if you have a certain prompt, which is kind of like it's worse than LLMs because of the way the latent space works. So there it's like, okay, if I'm generating a photo of a wedding, um, a lot of the times if I'm generating four photos, like they probably surface Christian weddings. That's what's been happening, at least right now, with the models that I'm interacting with. Um, but say I want like diversity in terms of um the location or the kind of wedding, like the religion, or maybe even gender representation. I think that's something that image models really struggle with. If I ask it to like generate an image of a lesbian or gay couple or something like that. Um, but yeah, so I try this method of like prompting my way out of things. I can get far, decent degree. Like, okay, I'll say, give me a Hindu wedding or like a Muslim wedding or something like that. I do get a decent representation, and then I can keep going on and on. But I'll see, for example, if I say something like, um, okay, wedding is a bad example. If I have an image of food, say it's Indian food or something, and I say, okay, make it more Indian or add more Indian food to it, it'll just keep adding the same item that's already there. So for India, I notice it always has like, it generates samosa, which, like, for people who may not know, is like this pastry filled with like potatoes and peas or something. Um, and I say, okay, give me more Indian food. So it'll just add like 20 more samosas into the image. So what ends up happening is your prompt you have to keep be getting more and more specific with your prompt um, to sort of align this model with whatever task or whatever you want the output to be, um, which is a overhead in my opinion, both like compute and your own time and effort and stuff like that. So I definitely think that like prompting can get you to a decent extent, but like again, like I had mentioned, we might want to also look into how we design a loss function and some data interventions to prevent this like uh us having to be highly specific all the time about what we want. LLMs are way better. Image generation models are not as good in my opinion yet. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And talking about image generation, like one of the coolest works that I have seen, like when I was researching a bit about your profile, is work that is related to transcreation. And I wanted to like also spend some time learning more about the motivation, what it means, and how did you end up working on this project. But yeah, I wanted to like start off with which I think one paper that won you the EMNP Best Paper Award. And I really like the title. Like I'll also link this in the show notes, but um, the title of that paper is An Image Speaks a Thousand Words, but Can Everyone Listen? So can you tell a bit more about, and I know a bit of background. You did tell me about a story of like how this motivation came into place, where you were working with an organization that was creating stories for people, for children in one cultural background, but when it was translated to different backgrounds, it did not translate the entirety of like what context was being preserved in the source text or like source content. So can you like maybe start from the start of like how did you first of all found this problem, how did you tie it down to a research problem, and what did you end up noticing or finding while you're working on this research?
Yeah, so yeah, I know you mentioned that, yeah, we had briefly discussed the motivation. Firstly, thank you for being so kind. Yeah, so I think the image transcreation paper, I like like you mentioned, I had been working with this organization that creates storybooks for children. This was during my time at Google itself, like 2 years before my PhD, actually, or a year before my PhD. And they had these storybooks for children. The stories had images and text, and the illustrators were from India and Africa. So a lot of the stories were sort of based on concepts and like imagery from those places because the illustrators were familiar with that. Um, so they had these stories written in Indian languages, African languages, but when they human translated the text of those stories to different languages, like say they translated it to a bunch of different European languages, um, they saw that not a lot of children were reading those stories in the European languages, but they had like a lot of reads in Indian languages. And the text was being very meticulously translated. Like the text translation was being done by humans. They were instructed to like translate puns and idioms also to make it more culturally relevant and stuff like that. But then they were just like puzzled as to why children are still not reading the translated stories. And like one hypothesis they had was the images of the stories were like highly contextual to say. Like one example I often use is about this story, um, which is of an Indian grandmother making like coconut barfi, which is a dessert for her grandson. And in the images, she is wearing a traditional Indian sari. The background and is like set in southern coastal regions of India. There is an image where she's picking out coconuts using like a pulley, which is made out of logs of wood and tires and stuff like that. And it's probably all of this imagery is not something maybe a child reading this in Spanish would be able to relate to because they haven't seen something like this. They may not be able to relate to the way the grandmother is portrayed in the image. They won't be able to relate to her as their grandmother. So it becomes way less engaging for for the child who's reading it. Um, and at the time, I found this problem very fascinating. So they were like, can we also sort of recontextualize the image or culturally localize the image so that the meaning of the image doesn't change, like it's still coherent with the story, but like maybe we can change the sari to like something women wear in, I don't know what grandmothers wear in like different countries in Europe. But yeah, making the imagery sort of relatable to the child as well. And like this was 2020, so we didn't even have like Dali and like we didn't have anything back then, I think. Yeah. So um, I was really fascinated by that problem because after that, I realized that, okay, it's not just about like these stories, but um, it's a very important problem maybe for advertisements also. Like we see Coca-Cola's ads, they have like very localized ads, like their agenda, like their motto itself is like think global, act local. Um, so this is a very big problem there. We also see it in movies a lot. I don't know if you've watched Inside Out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when Inside Out adapted in their adaptation for Japan, they made a lot of like visual changes. Like there was a scene, so in the US version, like there was a scene where the child was eating broccoli and they wanted to show that the child hates what she's eating. So they used broccoli in the US. Apparently, children don't like broccoli. But in Japan, children love broccoli. So they changed the broccoli to bell peppers so that the meaning of the scene remains unchanged. Then they changed soccer to ice hockey and they made a lot of like these visual changes, which you'd often not notice because I don't think you'll end up watching it in like two different versions.
Right.
So yeah, like people do this a lot in like movies as well. Um, and I found the problem very fascinating because up until then, machine translation as a concept, as a task that people work on, had been confined to language, either expressed through speech or text. But um, there is a lot of multimodal content around us today. And um, in movies, actually, people even change like the background score because apparently music can be interpreted differently across different cultures. So if you want to evoke the same emotion in your audiences, they would make sure that the background score like evokes the same emotions across different people. So I used to find that very, very fascinating. Like, because they also argue, and this has been studied a lot outside of AI. People argue that if we just translate one modality in a multimodal piece, it actually makes it worse because it causes a lot of cognitive dissonance to the
Yeah.
receptor. Um, so yeah, like I think these were kind of my motivations, and I was like, I really wanted to just extend the scope of machine translation to like consider the visual modality too. Um, so yeah, that's where it kind of started.
Makes sense. Yeah, the only cultural appropriation I think I've seen, like when it comes to content, is in terms of the transcript. Like if I'm dubbing one movie or like one
Yeah,
content in the other, they would make like subtle changes. But like you said, it doesn't really translate the crux of it, because at the end you have to only change one modality, and now it has actually created more confusion in the
yeah,
people who are listening or like consuming that content. So yes,
yeah.
that kind of
I
makes
have
sense.
a very funny example when you mentioned captions. So like even this is recent. I think like people used to not do this in 2014, 2015. I think 2014 was when NMT, like neural machine translation came out. But like, so I remember as a child, I was watching Harry Potter in Hindi uh, on my cable TV or something. And that time, translation used to be very literal. Like they used to just do word to word translation. So I still remember this because it was so funny back then. But like they say "holy shit" a lot
Yeah.
in like throughout the series. So the Hindi translation became like "pavitra tatti," which for people who don't know Hindi actually means like uh, pious poop or something.
Yeah.
So, oh God, I found that so funny. And like I used to even watch like Twilight or something in Hindi. And like there was a scene about some lion and goat or something. And then that also became the literal translation. It used to be so funny. I think only recently, not recently, it's been like maybe 4 or 5 years. Netflix subtitles especially do this cultural appropriation, which is pretty like cool to see also. I sometimes watch a movie with the subtitles to see how they have kind of changed it. But yeah, like we've come quite far, especially in text. in terms of doing this cultural appropriation. Yeah, sorry, that example came to my head, so I just wanted to mention.
No,
Um,
definitely. Even a lot of examples come to my head. Like, but again, that won't be useful. But coming back to the image transcreation part, I wonder, like, how did you end up um, evaluating these models? Like, did you end up creating a data set that had manual annotators translate these image into different backgrounds? Like, for example, in the one that you said, like Indian to Spanish version, like Sari to like some other. Like, how did you end up evaluating the framework or whatever you ended up developing? Because this would still be like a very subjective
mhm.
evaluation, right? Like, there is not one metric that um, you can measure like when you are doing these translations.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the first thing that I was thinking about when I wanted to like just operationalize this task for machine learning was how do I evaluate any sort of system that I build? Because I had some initial ideas of like how to build a system, like wasn't that complicated. Like you could prompt just an end-to-end image editing model or like do some pipeline approaches. But like for the evaluation, what at least we did was we built a test set out of like the test set was 700 images. Um, there were 600 images which were based off of like very simple concepts. Like we had images from like food, beverages, agriculture, housing. We had these 17 categories that we had taken from a linguistic resource. And these categories are such that like they are highly prevalent across multiple cultures of the world. Like every culture has some notion of food, beverage, clothing, housing. Um, and then we just went and collected um, images of like 5 images for different concepts in these categories. And each image just showed that one like food item or like one beverage like yerba mate or something. Um, so that was like that's how we collected 600 images. The task was simply that okay, and we collected these for 7 countries. And the task was simply that, okay, I have this food image, say I have a hamburger, and I want to make this more relevant to, say, Nigeria or something. I don't know how popular hamburgers are in Nigeria, but like the task is basically can you change this food item into another food item that might be more popular or more relevant to Nigeria? And we, okay, this was 600 images, and the other 100 images we curated from like real world applications. So, real world applications are like math worksheets and storybook images. And these were actually taken from these applications. So, we had actually reached out to this company which created math worksheets, got some permissions to use their data, etc. And there the task is more challenging because, say, for example, you have a worksheet which is teaching children how to count objects. And there was a worksheet which was from the US. They had a lot of Halloween themed objects, like there were spiders and pumpkins and houses. Like you can imagine, like they have all of these on a sheet, and then on the side they have like count the number of pumpkins, count the number of houses, count the number of spiders. So now if this needs to be localized, like we found another equivalent for India where they taught the same thing, like teaching children how to count objects using Diwali themed objects. So like they had different diyas and different, I don't remember, some other things. So here it's more challenging because a model has to kind of change the worksheet such that it's more relevant to your target country. But the learning goal has to be the same, like the learning outcome of teaching children how to count objects has to be um, sort of like maintained. in the translation. Um, and we actually didn't collect any cold references because, like you said, like if I'm changing that hamburger image to some other food item, I might have multiple ways in which I can translate that image. Um, so we just collected the source images, then we ran it through some pipelines, and we asked humans to evaluate the output. Like we gave humans like a very big instruction sheet, explained the task to them, and asked them to rate the model output on like 5 or 6 different dimensions. Like, is this image more relevant to the target country? Does it look natural? Um, is it offensive in any way? And stuff like that. Um, so yeah, that's how we designed it.
Nice. And tying this to the Pangea work that you kind of, I think, your research evolved into Pangea.
Yeah.
One question, we already touched a bunch of topics on the Pangea tangent, but one topic that always comes into my head, like when I'm working on computer vision models, specifically for medical AI, we end up fine tuning these models, which in some ways you're also doing it for different tasks. Like it could be either for alignment or for other reasons. Um, one concern like any researcher would also have is like losing the performance on the text or like any data set that we have that it was trained for. And one of the key things that I've read from your Pangea paper is you also did notice that the performance on English text, for example, should not be reduced if we were to fine tune these models for different tasks. I wonder like what kind of findings you found. Like did doing a strict instruction fine tuning or any kind of fine tuning, supervised fine tuning process, did that end up making a model that performs lesser good on the English text rather than other downstream tasks, or was it not the case? And if that was the case, like how did you end up preserving minimum performance on the source text that it was pre-trained on? And then basically my question is like how do you make sure like the fine tuning process adds things only regardless of removing things in terms of performance from the original model?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in Pangea, we did this sort of fine-tuning on high quality data that we filtered out from Lion. Um, and I think, yeah, so we did notice that. So the thing about English is, yes, performance on English tasks drops, but in multilingual models, like there's been a paper on this. I think I don't remember the title. It was something like what language do multilingual models think in, or something like that, something along those lines. Um, and I think one thing we started noticing was if we reduce English text a lot, the multilingual performance also starts dropping because I think the model sorts of leans on the capabilities it has learned through English text and data to even even do well on multilingual tasks through this sort of cross-lingual transfer, which is internally happening somewhere. And like, yeah, like you mentioned, a lot of these fine-tuning things may have this sort of catastrophic forgetting behavior where they forget what they had previously learned. So you have to be careful about um, like the portion of data in fine-tuning which actually helps preserve some of your pre-trained model capabilities. I think ours was mostly empirical. Like, we had been tracking the performance on English and even all the other tasks, um, and how it is changing based on the percentage of English data that we have in our fine tuning. And I think there was a blip in the curve, and we sort of stopped where the performance started dropping. So it was mostly empirical. Um, yeah, at least as far as I remember, because it was a large team. So I can also confirm with other authors. But at least as far as I know, this is how we had done it. Yeah.
Makes sense. And in terms of baking cultural knowledge into these models, and I'm sure you must have been asked this question, or like even you would have spent a lot of time thinking about it. But I still wanted to understand like how you answer this question is, um, since most of the cultural knowledge that is existing in regions that have been not well documented, like English, like you said, like a lot of people speak, a lot of things have been documented online primarily in English language, so it's not easy to collect large scale data sets for other cultural backgrounds. How would you still end up making sure, like how do you still bake cultural knowledge for things that don't exist in data sets? Do you still think a
Mm,
lot of cultural knowledge would still be missed out? Because at the end, like for example, you said like you had around 700 samples in test set, right? And that
mm.
itself also would be a massive subset of like what cultural knowledge exists out there. um,
Yeah.
do you think that is still a limitation? We It will require a lot of fine tuning iterations, a lot of post hoc work in order to get to a point where we have appropriate cultural knowledge baked into these models so that people can
Mm.
actually use it? Or do you think it very differently on this aspect?
Yeah, that's also a good question. So I think so this is I did some recent work on this. Like this was from my summer internship last year. Uh, so I have slash had this hunch that there is a lot of knowledge in the parameters of at least the pre-trained model, um, which we are not able to fully elicit through our prompting techniques, etc. Um, like there is a lot of knowledge on the internet which may not end up being surfaced when we interact with these models. So the question is, what is the extent to which these models actually have, like how much knowledge do these models actually have about these different cultures that we care about? And can we estimate that in some way? Which I think we cannot. Like, unless we have access to the pre-training data set and then we can go through that entire thing. But like, um, yeah, can we estimate how much knowledge they actually have? And based on that, like, do we spend efforts in better elicitation strategies or like collecting more data and fine-tuning them uh, because we think that the data. So up until I did that work in my internship last year, like I was very tired of hearing this argument, like in a lot of papers where it's like, oh, these languages and these cultures are low resource, so we need more data for them. And then people go out and I think that's what I mean. Like it's effective for sure. Like we had also done that in Pangea and cultural Pangea, and it definitely works. But you kind of filter out a very high quality subset and then you fine tune your model on that subset and then um, yeah, then its capabilities improve. But like my hunch was that there is still a lot of data on the internet for these languages and these cultures which we haven't been able to fully utilize or learn how well we can utilize it. And at least in the paper, what I found was it was more of an interpretability analysis paper. So we did find a lot of features that actually encode a lot of culturally salient information. And then if we activate those features at inference, we can surface like rarer concepts or more culturally salient plus rarer concepts. Um, that said, I think there are still a lot of languages, lots of cultures that are not digitally represented. And for them, like there is no data on the internet. Um, what I think is that, like, at least when we're targeting that category of languages, um, there needs to be a seed investment. It's a chicken and egg problem. I think it's like you need to have like some capabilities in a model to get people to interact with it. And then once people start interacting with it, you have access to their interactions with which you can improve the models even more so with the like methodologies we have today. Um, so I think maybe like it works in a startup, I guess. Like you need an initial seed investment, you build like a small product out of it, and then hope that it kind of helps you build out and sustain itself or whatever. Um, I think here also, like, there needs to be some initial work done on trying to collect data, maybe going to the people, at least looking at if we can digitize some books, newspapers, some local resources, build a working model with how much ever data we can get, and then making people interact with it, and then collecting more data through that process. So I think we need to do that for languages that are completely absent from the internet. Um, but I think like yeah, for the category which people keep saying are low resource, I think there's still a lot of data, and we might need to come up with better ways to um, extract it. Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah. And like switching gears for like developing these models, one of the key things that you have also been working on is making sure evaluation is accurate for these
Mm.
tools and technologies that you have been developing. Um, and evaluation, like in general, like even outside of your research, I have seen like with LLMs, evaluation is like the biggest bottleneck that we have nowadays, and it's becoming very tricky because even like I have been interacting with a lot of tools. The biggest, like at least when we are using like AI coding tools, we want tools that are like deterministic, right? Like if I were to make any workflow, like agentic workflow, or in general any LLM based tools, I need to have like guarantee that it can reproduce certain outputs that I did, or like I intended to design to. So first of all, I want to understand, do you think moving forward, like in the next 5 years or so, evaluation, like making these, like there's a whole paradigm of people are developing LLMs that generate data, then people are developing LLMs that evaluate this data, and then we also have LLMs that take in this recursive loop and update the first model that was developed in the very first step. Do you still think there is some validity in terms of reproducibility guarantees for this whole LLM based, LLM as judges, LLM as evaluators, in the whole process of developing these evaluation workflows? Or is there a is there a non guarantee that this can fail? There's not real merit to it.
Mm. So I'm going to break it down into two parts. Let me know if I understood this correctly. So I think the first part was about how, or maybe like overall, it's about evaluation is very important. And how reliable do you think the current evaluation paradigm is, which heavily leans on LLMs to sort of get LLM ratings, then maybe even generate synthetic data using LLMs, using that data to improve LLMs? So I guess one part is about um, how reliable using LLMs for evaluation is, and another part is about um, can we get far if we do this sort of recursive self-improvement where we use actually I don't think that is recursive self-improvement. Basically this loop of using LLMs to generate synthetic data and then improving your model using that synthetic data, evaluating that model using an LLM, like that entire loop, does it, will it lead us, will it be doom, or will it help?
Yes. Yes.
um
Yeah. Sorry for the long question. Yeah. Feel free to break it down, or at
yeah.
least, or if you want to answer just the part of like evaluating, like using LLMs as judges, that's also completely fine. But that's more like an extended question I had, like, because I've seen people developing these agentic workflows that has like
Mm.
2 or 3 different models that are placed at different stages, and that is being called as like a recursive approach to like improving these models. And I just wonder, like, since you have been working on evaluations, is there any good merit in this
Yeah.
loop?
So I would firstly like highly agree, or like maybe even try to point out that evaluation, I think, is very important. It kind of drives progress, in my opinion. It's like if you can come up with a good metric slash benchmark, which has high correlation with the task that you're actually wanting to improve downstream, um, and is objective, measurable, reliable. Um, there isn't subjectivity that, oh, if I change the seed, like with LLMs, that would happen. Um, I'll get a different response. So I guess like there are a bunch of, um, I would say, people who do evaluation theory um, can maybe say the can list out a bunch of constraints that would make a metric or an eval like scientifically good. I unfortunately don't know all of those constraints. But I definitely think evaluation needs to be reliable. It needs to be um, correlated with downstream use. I think we had briefly talked about this. Like, I don't work a lot with coding agents, but I think like um, Swebench, for example, uh, drove a lot of progress in that field slash domain because they came up with a very challenging benchmark at the time, which was just hard enough for the next generation of models to sort of hill climb on. It was very objective, very measurable, very concrete. Um, so I think that definitely helps drive a lot of progress. Um, and I don't think we can rely on just LLMs. Like in coding, for example, you have like unit tests, right? But here, like I don't think we can rely on just an LLM to evaluate how good a model is at a task. Um, because especially for tasks that might lean on being a bit subjective. Um, and I think separate from evaluation, if we think of like this generating distilled synthetic data and then fine-tuning your model using an LLM and completely removing humans out of the loop, uh, might also not be the most ideal thing to do with the current state of models that we have, in my opinion. I'm not sure how the future might look like. But like I think to improve like just for model capabilities to improve generalization and robustness, um, the model might benefit by it depends on what the teacher model is, which generates the synthetic data, I guess. But the model may benefit from seeing much more like high quality non AI real data. Um, this is what a lot of people have been trying to do. Like I was reading the MAI thinking paper which had come out recently. Um, and I was really trying to find an answer to why they keep emphasizing that they don't use any distilled data in pre-training, etc., etc. Um, I don't exactly know why, uh, but it did give me the hunch that uh, like it hurts model performance during pre-training. So yeah, I think right now removing humans from the loop completely, or like completely relying on synthetic slash AI generated data, evaluation metrics, etc., may not be a solution to all of our problems. Especially evaluation needs to be like human generated, verified by humans, etc. Like because everyone's going to use that one evaluation data set slash metric to build the next generation of models. So you need to put in an effort, I think, to build it uh, in a very good way. Um, yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think the bottleneck is always going to be like the human evaluation, which I think has been creeping up in all fields. Like whenever people are using things at scale, evaluation is like becoming the biggest bottleneck for all workflows that are like at high stakes. But I wonder, like, would you imagine like something like SweBench can exist for creative um, models? Like, for example, like even your transcreation work, right? Like in some ways, I would say that is creative. There's not like one bench or like one output that you can verify against. Or do you think that should not exist? Like we need separate frameworks to evaluate those kind of things. Like SweBench should not be the thing we should aim for.
Hmm. That's a very good question. So I think for, let's say for the transcreation task, I was just recently talking to someone and they had suggested. So I don't really collect these reference images, which your source image should translate into, because, like you said, there can be multiple valid responses. So one way of, like, let's say, not doing the human evaluation on your model output, but actually getting this sort of concrete number on how well your model is performing is to collect a ground truth set of images. So maybe like 20 images or 30 images or 50 or 100 images, which are valid responses to that input image. Um, and then the way you can measure how good your model is by checking for precision and recall, like how well your model outputs can overlap slash cover that your gold distribution of images rather than just having one gold image. Um, so there are ways to like concretize it, especially if I'm talking about that image transcreation task. But for creative tasks in general, I think like, let's say, for example, mm, okay, so in this image transcreation, I gave like an example of how we can have this gold reference set. Let's say if I'm writing poetry or something like that, if I'm judging poetry or like sonnets or something like that, there, uh, there are probably rules which might be objective, like it has to follow a certain like rhythm or like they have, I think, a bunch of rules in which uh like which that piece needs to sort of, or a bunch of constraints that the piece needs to be within the bounds of to make it good. And those kind of things you can measure, so that you can measure maybe like a cap, like uh it's at least good to a certain degree, but then beyond that, how good it is a bit subjective based on like the reader, um, and how people perceive it. In the image transcreation case, like, okay, I can see, okay, it's one of these concepts, but like how the image is actually rendered and like how well it represents that concept. Like if it's generating an image of a sushi, like does that look as authentic as it should be, etc. Those things again are like that subjective gap. So I think like, and I think the thing about creativity also is that like I have spent some time thinking about creativity, and then if you think about what makes something creative, it's like it's something which is out of distribution. Like uh it's something which might surprise you, or like you'll be like, oh yeah, that's so cool. Like, so that's because like it's something you've never seen before, or it's very novel, or it's very exciting, and those kind of things. Um, and like I imagine if you try to benchmark something like that, uh, it becomes in distribution, if that makes sense. Like, and then you'll have to change the benchmark again. Because if you can measure it, it's not exciting anymore. So, like, I think it can be very challenging uh, to think of benchmarking creativity as a whole, but maybe for certain tasks, like one thing that, like, one of my next projects, like, I'm trying to build some model which can generate like images for say ads and educational material. Like typically all that data is copyrighted. So I'm trying to think of like some synthetic data methods. Um, so even in ads, like you can be very creative with your ad, but there is a concrete measurable outcome in the end, which is like did the sales of your product increase with that ad that you put out, right? Now, say in a hypothetical world, if I create this synthetic environment of agents that are buying and selling products and looking at ads that are being created by other agents, I may be able to measure like how good my ad is based on how well it sells the product. So like I think downstream there'll always be some sort of concrete measure. Um, in movies and all, it's about like it's harder with some applications. Like in movies and all, you want to evoke emotions and like, but that can also maybe be measured by like your box office numbers or something. I don't know. So if we have a way for different applications, if we can find ways to sort of bring that concrete number which you have access to at the end of things back into the pipeline where you're actually building out your content, whatever, um, we can measure like certain aspects of things in creative domains. Um, I think creativity as a concept might be very hard to measure because, again, like I don't even think it can be measured without accounting for the person um, who's going to be using whatever the model is outputting. Um, So that itself makes the design of the metric highly variable because you need to factor in the person itself. Yeah, I don't know. I went
Yeah.
into a long tangent. Sorry. I was just
No, that
thinking.
completely makes sense. And I like the
Uh,
idea of like how you tied it down to at least one of the downstream tasks, which again, like ads would be like just one of the examples, but people can there would be a there would be a test, or like there would be a way to evaluate, like when we are developing these models that
yeah.
can do a certain creative task. Like for example, in your transcreation work, you had like some idea of steering the model, or at least making sure how the model performs based on like certain areas of the image, and
Mm.
then people can take on these models and then further evaluate it for a different task. But there won't be like one gold mark standard benchmark that you can use or develop that can continuously make sure and evaluate all the models across different labs or different groups who are working on it. So that makes sense.
Yeah, like I think just to summarize, I think it needs to be application specific. And the more like rubric based we can make it, the better we might be able to prevent like reward hacking behavior and stuff. Like very multi-dimensional rubric, like it needs to satisfy all these constraints. So maybe we can get there to a certain extent, but I don't think we can still fully measure, you know, creativity.
Makes sense. All right. And zooming out, I just wanted to take the last segment of this podcast to like maybe just focus on you as a researcher and like try to get some perspective, because a lot of people who are listening to this podcast and tend to be like young researchers, or like people who are new to the field of AI, trying to figure out like where they want to start, how they want to contribute. So I'll ask like few specific questions. And since one of the questions that I personally do end up thinking is, you started your PhD, I would say 5 years back, correct me if I'm wrong, but at least, so that would be still like early days of all these LLM hype and like LLM usage. And even before that, you were involved in different parts of research projects. As of now, like we have like so many different coding tools. For example, AI based coding tools. We have chat gpt that can do research. We have auto research, which can like do research for you like in a very end to end fashion. So there are tools out there that promise to change how we do research in general, whether it be coding, whether it be literature reviews, whether it be like doing mathematical research, and so on and so forth. How much would you say has your workflow changed using these tools, if any you have been using? And what aspects still feel like I mean, it feels weird to call it human, but like what aspects of research still feels like these tools cannot do and would not be able to do, at least in the near future?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I started my PhD like yeah in 2022, like 2 months before the ChatGPT movement actually. So it's really cool. Like I've been able to witness a lot of like rises, I guess. Um, the way my workflow has changed is so I'll start with the positives. I think like I I love coding agents. Um, like it's made empirical work easier, especially running hyperparameter searches, like doing some sort of um I think they just improved, especially like this year. Like even last like summer of 2025, they were not as good as they are today. But like things like, okay, I want to log this run into OneBee. It's just like, yeah, can you log it to OneBee? Can you like do this? Can you like do that? Can you set up like the same experiment but for like these 30 different configs? Um, I really enjoy not having to do all of those things. Um, Yeah, it's like sped up the pace at which you can do research, especially because like I think when you're doing research, okay, like there is the idea part of it, but then to make sure your hypothesis or like the work you are doing to verify your hypothesis is robust enough and your results make statistical meet statistical significance requirements, etc. Those things require a bunch of empirical work. In my first project, especially, I remember like it just took me a long time to do all of the experiments for like different seeds, different models, different tasks, etc. So I really appreciate how those things have become very easy to do today. Um, some things like within the coding agent realm itself, again, like things may have changed, but at least a few months ago when I was trying to write code from scratch for like a new problem, new project, um, yeah, models used to error out. Like there were I remember some common errors were like I realized they are as lazy as humans. Like it used to implement something and then uh like if I'm running it, I used to often find like some functions which had to implement something a bit complicated. It would just be commented out and it would be written like will implement if needed or something like that. So I used to find those behaviors very surprising. I don't know if it's changed now. This was like a few months ago. Um, so those were interesting to see, but at least for like things where I need to not go 0 to 1, but like 1 to 100, it's like very, very good. Um, then parts of research which I think will remain human or are human. Um, I would say like I even use LLMs to brainstorm my ideas sometimes. I think it can't maybe look at the world in the way that I can. So I think like um again when I was searching for problems to work on in 2022, 2023, I think one advice my advisor had given me was like he had shared this article with me about this economist and the way they search for problems, and it's like not through papers but by reading like the news and like what's happening around you in the real world. And like that's how I was also motivated in my problem, like observing something which happened in the real world. And that comes by talking to people who are actually facing a problem with a product slash um whatever whatever they've built basically and put out in the real world. So I guess like LLMs may lack that, like they don't have the capability maybe to eh, interact with the world that we do and observe from our experiences and come up with hypotheses. But I still think that they have gotten very, very good just based on all of the data we have on the internet. Um, but they may not be as good as us in coming up with slightly more novel ideas. Like they might be building off of things which have been proposed maybe in some way or the other. Um, uh, yeah, that's my hunch. But when I do brainstorm with them, like say I have this initial seed idea about something and I do brainstorm like to develop it further, I always find good use. Like maybe because I'm not aware of like related work that's been done, so it can fetch it for me and then I can look through it and stuff like that. So it's a very good companion once you've come up with this initial seed idea. Um but I do see that it is being able to increasingly become more and more helpful in at least the part of research where we need to verify our hypothesis um, and carry out the experimental work, empirical work to do it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's very like I completely second all the points you said because no, but I was just gonna say that I mean I completely second all the points you said. And if I were to go in the same order, I spent around like 1 year of my start of my PhD just like doing a lot of data engineering tasks like data cleaning, making sure everything is very accurate. Like, and I used to work with medical images, with itself for like a whole
Mhm.
different challenge, like just understanding and working with packages that were like not actively developed or like maintained in the last 10 years or so. And so I used to go along the lines of working with R studios, like free surfer packages, bash scripting, which typically like I mean we by default know how to work with, but we just don't end up a lot of time spent on that. And so looking back, if I had tools like this, like what we have, like Cursor or like Cloud and everything, things would have been like so much easy to think about or
Yeah.
something and then go from thought process to implementation fast and not spend too much time on top of it. But I do agree, like LLMs have been like super useful for me if I come across a new topic, and if I were to just do a quick summary of like how that topic feels like and what people have been working on, it gives me a very good start point. But then if I were to still chat about my research topic with any models out there, they won't have that kind of like, to what you said, the kind of intuition that auto research models should have is I still feel lacking, and I don't know how people can train on top of it because the data would be super limited. Like you said, like the model cannot think the way you think because of your background and like how what kind of experience you have had to connect different dots. And the way I have seen like most of my research topics, like me and my advisor, like we tried so many things, and based on like the things that did not work out and based on her experience of like her background of doing research and being a professor and my background of like tying or like maybe seeing different papers, then we end up connecting some dots and say, okay, this should work. And like that's how you narrow down the funnel. I still haven't seen auto research do that. um, and it strictly relies on like very numerical completeness. Like for example, it can trigger off a standard statistical analysis of results. Like for example, is this statistical significant? But if it is not, what does that really mean? That second step of analysis I feel is always missing from these tools. But yeah, to answer the question, like would that be completed in the next 5 years? I don't know yet. But that intuition of interpreting from the field results is something very hard to bake.
Yeah, I do think like in some sense like we have complementary the humans and LLMs have complementary strengths. And I do think that LLMs have a lot of strengths. Like I think our strength is that we can interact with the real world. And we've gone through like decades, billions of years of evolution and stuff like that. But like, uh, I I just wanted to emphasize, like, I feel like they are extremely useful. Like, they are also extremely useful in like learning. Um, like when I'm trying to learn a new concept, like I used to do blog posts and videos before this, but now it's like I can go to any level of complexity and depth just by asking it to like explain it to me simply or go more mathematically deep and stuff like that. And that really like the models are highly capable in multiple ways. They have a lot of storage memory which we don't have, so they can retrieve things. um but maybe they lack, I hope they don't get this, because yeah, we'd be highly undervalued then, but they do probably lack on this sort of experience from the real world, interacting with the real world. And that's what we can sort of bring in into this collaboration. But I feel like I'm generally a little positive, like very powerful technology at our hands, and we can do a lot of great things with these models. We just need to do it properly, I guess, so as to prevent this AI slop, which happens now. Yeah.
Makes sense. And as a researcher, if someone were to come up to you and ask in 2026, I want to do a research because I'm fairly interested in AI, which is not that uncommon nowadays because of the whole hype around AI. But
Mm.
if they were to ask you for advice on picking a topic, picking a very broad area of AI research, and then narrowing it down to a PhD topic, how would you guide them of like how do I, for example, like just for like kickstarters, like some people might just say everyone focuses on LLMs because computer vision seems to be like a very stale or dead area of research versus some other topics like robotics or like whatever it would be. How would you go about guiding them? How can they find their interest and a niche that genuinely excites them, and they can build a career out of it?
Yeah, that's again a very good question. So I think uh topics, again, like limited experience, like maybe someone who's been in the field for 20, 30 years might have more nuanced opinions, but topics and their like maybe hotness or like stuff like that can change frequently. Some things are timeless, like the transformer architecture. But like say right now, I think there's a lot of like hype. No, and like it's not invalid. It's very valid. Like around RL and the use of RLHF for LLMs, etc. Started in like what 2024 and beginning of 20. So I think in 24, 03, 01, like
Yes.
OpenAI's O1 models started using RLHF, and then I think Kimi open sourced, like had an open source recipe for RLHF, and then it people realized how well it improves the model capabilities, and then right now it's like, yeah, wherever I go, like people are like RL is like the buzz thing, right? So, but it was not 2 3 years ago, I would say, at least in LLM land. Uh, so I think the buzz and everything can be keep changing. Um, so okay, so I have two parts again to this answer. So one is like how I view it, and maybe how someone else, like how someone should view it for themselves. I think my personal views have changed over time. Like I had mentioned, I started when I started doing a PhD, I wanted to do this sort of depth focused thing, and I wanted to be able to explore this one topic, or not one topic, like I wanted to go into the depths of a problem, think of more interesting ideas there, blah blah. um but over the course of my PhD, I think things changed a lot, and my mindset also changed quite a bit. I Over the years, grew to value being adaptive, um, and having a more like meta level goal of how do you like we all are trying to shape the technology of tomorrow, in my opinion. So, and I know like some people have a much bigger role to play, some people have a much smaller role to play, but we all are playing a role nonetheless. So how do like I want to play a role in shaping that technology, and that's my goal. And I am fairly open now to work on a wide variety of problems. If something is hot right now, it's probably hot because it's very effective to improve the state of models that they are in today, to bring them to a better state tomorrow. And then tomorrow, some other recipe might be very hot to bring it from that state to the next state. So if my goal is to be a part of bringing it from this state to this state to this state, then I'm going to be very open minded and I'm going to try to like learn different things quickly so that I can contribute to this model development. That's the way I think of it today, because maybe I feel satisfied with the depth goal I had a few years ago, because I did that for 2, 3 years and I had a lot of fun doing it. Um, but today I view things very differently. For someone who's starting a PhD, I would say, again, it depends on what they want out of it. If they also want to do this sort of, they want to be a part of like maybe the next generation of models or something like that. I think there's place in both academia and industry to do it. Then I think they should maybe follow this sort of strategy of trying to be um continually adaptive to like what's working the best right now, how can I make it even better, and like how can I change or how can I contribute to this the hot thing right now, and then that will help you be a part of the next hot thing too, because you'd be in that flow, that momentum. um but if, say, you have different goals, maybe like the kind that I did, like at the time I was like, I just want to do my own thing and I want to come up with like problems that I'm very proud of. I want them to be my own unique things. Like I had this thing, like I want to come up with my own stuff and all that. Um, I think there's a time and place for everything. So like if someone's entering a PhD with that mindset where they're like, I want to make some very foundational like change. Like maybe someone highly believes that transformer architecture can be optimized in many different ways, and they want to just spend a lot of time in their PhD thinking about a better, like, foundational architecture. They may or may not succeed. Um, but if they do succeed, like the impact they can have in the community can be very, very high. Um, So, because they'll do something which people who are doing that sort of next generation model building may not have time to do as much because there's a lot going on. And if you're continuously adapting to that next thing, you may not have time to like just spend on one thing in depth. So, yeah, I think for people who want to do that depth thing, or they have this one strong belief that, oh, okay, I really want to like, spend time doing this, then I think it makes more sense to not care about like what the hot thing is. You can always come back to the hot thing like 3 years later, 4 years later, or something. But for people who really care about like being a part of that impact and stuff, I think they should like adopt the strategy of keeping their eyes, mind, ears open to what's happening, learn that, and then yeah. Does that, again, I give a very long answer. I'm sorry. I have
No, no,
very
that's
long answers to your questions.
no, that's a good insight. I mean, I do agree. I think most of the people who I ask this question, they have a very specific answer as to finding your niche and then moving forward. But I think yours is much more honest. It's still fine. Like at least I and I do partially also agree to that. It's that if you happen to genuinely like a topic that is trendy right now, it's completely fine to follow that. And there is a likely chance, like at least the way I'm seeing this field, LLMs have opened up a whole new field in engineering. Like there's a whole ML ops niche that is being developed of like
Mm.
how to train these models, how to distribute the workload that is being going into like training these models, and agentic workflows, which itself is building a whole engineering loop in itself. How do you validate them, not at the model level or output level, but like making sure like one output feeds back into the other, and then you can build a recursive loop, which is much more engineering focused, like nothing
Yeah.
AI focused. So I definitely agree the field is here to stay and it's completely fine. But then yes, figuring out like if you genuinely like this topic so that you can make 5 years of your PhD, and then later part of your career is something that needs to be um, well established. Like a lot of people I have seen change their PhD directions in between the PhD or 3 years, 4 years down the line, which is not a very happy route to be on. If graduation becomes like a big priority. So, but yes, I do agree. Um, for the people who want to do a very strong contribution to the field, it has to come up from like a ground up approach. You cannot be looking for the trendy directions. You can be just focused on one aspect and then work very vertically on it, rather than following a trendy topic out of it. So yeah, I do agree with the insights you shared. And to close off this conversation, and like one question that I added, nowadays, since like I have seen your work spanning from a very different direction to like very getting very matured in a way that you're working on right now, like in terms of multilingual and multimodal models, what is one thing that you have noticed that AI um, is understated versus overstated for? Like a lot of things, like how these models work, how these models are trained, and how these models are fine tuned or like inferred and like prompted. What is one problem that you think is getting far less attention than what it should? Like people are clearly not working on it because there's not a very strong financial incentive on top of it. Like there's an overstatement when people say yes, AI can do this, there will be an AGI singularity, blah blah, versus there would
Mm.
always be an understatement wondering like why aren't people using AI models to do this.
That's a good question. So I think AI researchers are very smart, and people have been trying to work on a lot of different problems. Um, so I have maybe two or three things to say here. I know you asked for one, so let me think of one. Or actually, I'll
That's
just say
fine.
you can pick one.
Yeah,
Uh, so I think like um, the stuff that I research on also, I mean, yeah, I think it's important because of obviously like need to work equally well for all people who are interacting with the model, but the data is not equal. So obviously the model capabilities differ and stuff like that. But I think that's also recently being worked upon. One thing that I think about sometimes, it's not directly an AI problem. It may be like an artifact, but I see this issue of humans becoming like losing their skills in some sense. It's like the impact of AI on humans, or like the long-term impact of using AI for like our own skills. Because I feel like I'm surrounded by even subtly or maybe just blatantly things which are very like AI slop in like emails sometimes, um, in like paper reviews and rebuttals and stuff like that. And like the thing is, I feel it's very hard to um distinguish between like genuine intent of people versus when they use AI to do something. And also, I think there is a um, like with us becoming increasingly dependent on AI, we are losing our own strengths. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I feel like the pace of AI innovation is very fast. Um, and before we know it, it may have consequences um, for us, which we uh, may not be able to fully anticipate until it really happens to us. Um, yeah, I feel like since it's such an abstract thing, what I'm talking about, maybe I'm not even explaining it that well. It's hard to get funding for something like this and actually do research on it and like build AI sustainably in a way that it augments human capabilities downstream. Um, Although people are trying to think about it, but they think about it more from a safety perspective, safety alignment perspective. But I feel like this is also an important thing to think about sometimes, how AI is going to impact human learning in general and how we can design their use. We might need to, so again, like I think thinking machines have this, uh, like, actually, this is not very related, but like they developed a new paradigm of interacting with these models, that entire interaction model demo that they had. But on a similar line, I think we might need to think of like just some research into how we design these AI systems in a way that we can maximally benefit from them without them letting um, harm our own capabilities, if that makes sense. That's just on a more abstract level. I think if I think of model, like the technical capabilities, I also think that um, I feel like continual learning, like consistently learning from data and having a memory of it, um, um, is important. I think it is decently well researched. Uh, Again, not sure how much funding goes into it, so I don't know if, but these are just some problems that I think are worth thinking about and looking into. Um, but they may not be like the hottest topics right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I now that you say it, it kind of amplifies when I have noticed this, like the AI slop um, that goes around. But just to playing the devil's advocate, like I completely
Mm,
agree with the point that you raised. There has to be like some accountability of like how much we end up using, because for paper reviews, yes, since I am still like part of like bunch of papers that I've submitted, and I can definitely see this was not through a reviewer. Even like people who would have lesser experience reviewing it would not raise these questions, because these are like a um standard
yeah.
rebuttal questions, like what is the statistical significance of this, did you add more data sets? I mean, yes, you can always test it on n number of data sets and model would fail.
Yeah.
The way how we operate, um, the way, like for example, if for coding tools, you can clearly see that yes, some parts of implementation can be handed off to these models, and you would be more focused on developing workflows on top of it, with the of course the assumption you would need someone who understands the code if the model doesn't really work, they can go and fix. So it's always going to be a race of like, how let's see how real implemented and well implemented these tools are, because then you can leave some part of implementations to the rest of the site. For example, like where I'm working on right now, we are able to, when if we are using these tools, we can test out multiple different hypotheses on a tight deadline, versus what we were able to do like maybe let's say a year back or so. So that kind of really helps. But I do agree it comes with a drawback of the context switching across these different hypotheses also becomes like the biggest bottleneck. So now it's always it's always going to be the case, like how much time is enough, how many models are enough, like what kind of good performing model is enough. So there is some utility. We'll have to see once we know how deterministic these tools are. But I do agree, the slop is becoming a huge problem. Detecting good things out of the bad is, and that all again boils down to the question of evaluation. How do I
Yeah.
make sure the slop is good, any good or not?
I mean, I think to be honest, like we do have like just for slop, like we have good AI detectors and stuff like that. But like I think my point was more on how do we design the systems in a way that we don't increasingly become dependent on them completely to do our work. Uh, but there is a good balance. It's a very hard design question, maybe. There is a good balance in a way that they help us on things that we need help on, but we also don't like uh, completely blunt out our intelligence over very long usage. Because, like, sometimes now it's just so easy, right? Like, you can literally have like voice mode on and you can just chat with it, and like maybe even your typing speed will become slower like over a few months. So, like, sometimes I think about how to prevent those things, like, uh, we might need some regulations, research, some rules, or a way in which these systems are designed. Um, we might need those in place sooner rather than later because the pace at which we are becoming dependent on them is very high, in my opinion. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I guess it's a tricky thing to think about, I guess, but like, yeah.
makes sense. All right. Yeah, these are the only questions I had for you for the podcast. So once again, thanks for being here. I think we got to cover a lot of topics. Looking back from your research journey, working on multi-language problems to working on transcreation, all the way to Pangea multimodal models. And one of the key things I think even listeners would find it interesting is like how you have tied these problems to a very appropriate application, which I still think adheres to what you have in mind as real world applications. Like I think some work that you already worked on became part of, like you said, Google Assistant. So that's very fascinating to see. It's always nice to talk to someone who is working on these complex technologies which are emerging in different ways every day nowadays, but you are trying to dilute it down to like some real world applications that has some importance to the society. So yeah, thanks a lot for sharing all these insights. I will be leaving links to all the works that we have discussed in the show notes, so like people can read more and you maybe even reach out to you if they have any questions. So
Yeah,
thanks once again.
yeah, thank you so much for the invite, and I really enjoyed our conversation. I may have spoken a lot for a few things, so I apologize. But I had a lot of fun. Your questions were amazing. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.